round of this fine tournament. And I am happy to call Prime Minister Igor.
Dear adjudicatory panel, dear members of parliament, today's motion reads: this House, in hindsight, would still have fought 2003 war in Iraq. So first, we'd like to go through some definitions with you. When we are speaking about this House, we are speaking about the American government taking the decision to interfere in the situation in Iraq and apply military power against Saddam Hussein. We would also like to underline one very important fact, that essentially the reason for war from our side is that there was certain evidence at that point in time for Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. So this is the reason why we have interfered then officially, and why we would have still interfered even in hindsight, given the situation as it is right now. So first, another definition, small definition. When we're talking about weapons of mass destruction, what we're actually talking about, and this is very important, that these weapons can cause great damage to large amounts of population. And also, another part of the definition is that these weapons can be used by military power without engaging in the traditional direct warfare. So they can be used at a distance, which means that basically without cost to the one who is using them. So they do not actually have to send soldiers to use these weapons and sacrifice their lives. They just have to push the button. So this is pretty much at this stage we're done with the definitions part. Now I would like to proceed with our arguments. We have three major lines of argumentation of why we would still have fought this war. First is the nature of the weapons of mass destruction, which I have already touched upon. Second is an important thing, is the source of political authority in Iraq, and we're going to touch upon the question of sovereignty there with this regards and the respect for sovereignty of a certain state. And finally, our third argument, on which my colleague would extend, is going to be about the fact that power that we are having as an American government does not only bring you certain benefits and certain opportunities, it also brings certain responsibilities. So these are, to wrap it up, these are the three major things we're going to be talking about on our side. So first, as I have already told you, weapons of mass destruction are these kind of weapons that can cause great harm to large amounts of population, and the side which is using them will not necessarily bear any consequences. That it will bear consequences, definitely, but there is not going to be any direct warfare in which lives of the attacking side would be taken. On that, would you like a point of clarification?
Yes.
Yeah.
We know now there were no weapons of mass destruction. Do you agree with that?
Yes, this is basically something that I would like to point out. For now, as for the situation, the status quo for now, we haven't found the weapons of mass destruction here. But this is exactly which brings me to our first point. First, we have to evaluate the potential damage, and this is highly important there. Once again, weapons of mass destruction are those ones which can cause huge harm. Those are the weapons that can be used not only potentially against the United States, I think, of America, but also against different countries across the world and in the region. So now, when we're actually conducting the the analysis, what can be the potential harm if those weapons would have existed actually, and if these weapons could have been used against the harm which was actually incurred, we believe that it still makes sense to interfere, because what we should care about is we do not want to be thinking backwards. We should have applied military power in order to prevent something from happening. In this particular case, the nature of the weapon, thank you very much, the nature of the weapon and the nature of situations calls for us to be proactive, because otherwise we are going to suffer huge damages and huge human losses. And then at the same place, thank you. The other point which I would like to bring up here, yes, at this point in time we haven't found the weapons of mass destruction there, but at that point in time, and we're talking about that point in time, we had certain evidence for this. So we made our decision not on reasoning, based on reasoning. We thought that they are there, and this is why we have interfered, right? So the evidence, it's not like we didn't have evidence and we decided to interfere. The situation was as such that we actually did have evidence for that, and we decided to interfere. So this is very important from that part. And to wrap it up again a little bit, we interfered because we had the evidence, and we believe the potential harm of these weapons of mass destruction is going to be much greater than the actual harm which is going to be incurred by our military intervention. The second point is the question of sovereignty. And this is the question whether we actually do have the right to interfere in the military, in the internal affairs of a certain country. And what we're saying here is that yes, we can. In this particular situation, yes, we can. Because what is also important is the source of political authority within the country. We can respect sovereignty of another democratic nation for one reason, because they have certain checks and balances within their society there. And we are sure that the decision of using these weapons or not using these weapons or developing these weapons is going to be checked and balanced by the society within this country. While here, what we were dealing with is with a dictatorship. So what we actually dealing with is the will of one single person to decide, and we are believing that is too much of a risk to take, to be thinking all the time whether Saddam is going to wake up in a good mood or in a bad mood and use or not the weapons of mass destruction, because there are no checks and balances on him. So for the reason mentioned above, I beg you to support.
I thank the Prime Minister, and I'm happy to call on Leader of Opposition, Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When we consider this debate, the first thing we have to know is to think back and why was the decision made to go to war? The principal argument was that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and that those weapons of mass destruction gave warrant to the United States government to attack. We know now those weapons of mass destruction did not exist. They have not been found 10 years on from the invasion. So when we consider what we're asked to do in this motion, given what we know now, would we have done this or still not done this thing? We say clearly we should not have invaded Iraq. The United States government should not have invaded Iraq. Now, let me rebut a bit about. First, there's this question of the reason for war. So there was what the sounds of the Prime Minister is arguing is, look, weapons of mass destruction are very, very potentially bad, and that we should be able to invade in those cases. Well, given what we know now, Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction, so we shouldn't invade in that case. But also, we disagree with this principle that if you have weapons of mass destruction, you should invade. There are numerous countries around the world that have horrific weapons, nuclear bombs. North Korea has just tested a third nuclear bomb and sent a satellite into space that says they're getting closer to be able to drop these bombs around the world. We think it's highly problematic and very dangerous to the world's stability if we allow as a principle attack any country that has weapons of mass destruction. That means we're going to start, any nuclear power is open to this threat of an invasion, and that's very dangerous. The second thing is he asks about political authority and respect for sovereignty. And he says, well, Saddam was a dictator, and because he was a dictator, there wasn't any, that was enough to allow for an invasion, and we should have invaded for that reason alone. We think that alone is not a reason for an invasion as well. There's also very many other dictators in the world. We don't think that this all should be a carte blanche for any powerful nation to be able to go into attack. Cuba could be off the map for this reason. Venezuela could have been off the map for this reason, destroyed by whoever dislikes them. Also, too, it's easier for countries countries, no thank you, where it's less clear if a person's a dictator, but if another country can construe them as a dictator, then that gives them an ability to invade. So we might imagine a case like this between Russia and Georgia. You might imagine the Russian government arguing that Georgia's current leader is taking dictatorial powers, and therefore they need to go in and take care of things and bring back political freedom. So we think, again, that's not a good reason. So why else is this bad? We think that the principle of preemption is also bad. So at this point, Iraq had not attacked the United States in using these weapons of mass destruction, and the reasoning behind the decision was, look, they might. So we think that this preemption mechanism is very, very difficult, because then there's many other things that you might argue, oh, it might happen, it might happen. This is a very low bar to clear. There are many things that might happen in a world, and to go and kill tens of thousands of civilians, to risk the lives of people in militaries around the world, we don't think that's sufficient reason. Yeah, before I go to the next point.
Yeah. Do you believe that the United States in the Middle East achieves certain strategic goals that are very good?
Yeah, I do, and this is why I'm getting to it, how it's worse in the current world today. What has the Iraq War done? If you look at what's happening to the United States and its strategic influence in that region, it's on the decline. Why is it on the decline? One, right now the United States people does not have an appetite for war. The vast majority of the United States people do not have an appetite for war in that region. You see that as President Obama being elected on an anti-war message. He's reduced troops in Iraq. He's reducing troops in Afghanistan. Now, what has this done? By weakening Iraq, what the United States government has implicitly done is strengthen Iran. Now, why have they strengthened Iran? Because traditionally, Iraq and Iran were counter powers to each other. They fought a war. There were many tensions between these two groups. So now, with the lack of appetite for continued involvement in this region, and for the weakening of Iraq as a counterbalance to Iran's activities, Iran is becoming a larger player in this region. Now, why is this dangerous? One, because Iran has its own nuclear ambitions. It's currently building, there's more and more evidence that it's putting in centrifuges to to get closer to a nuclear weapon, but it's also able to control strategic areas of oil flows, for example, through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, with a stronger Iran and a smaller appetite for intervention from the American people, this implicitly strengthens Iran. Let me go on to the other some more points. Let's just look at how this affects the United Nations, because what we see, another thing too, is this whole intervention has weakened international institutions around the world. Basically, as many people view this intervention in the world, as the United States strong-armed the United Nations into supporting proposals, supporting Security Council measures in order to take this military action. So what this means is it makes the United Nations look subservient to one government, so that decreases the legitimacy of the United Nations as a body, a world governance body, and a body of forum for people to be able to come and create their, air their grievances and make a popular decision. It makes it look, this subservience undermines that premise. And especially as we consider the United Nations an institution built after the Second World War, inherently to help prevent the conflict in the world, that they go and through the Security Council accept a measure that allows this type of destruction is incredibly damaging and counter to what is proposed, what happened. Now, also, inherently, this question, this debate is going to have a lot of weighing of costs. Now, what we know now is we know tens of thousands of Iraqis were killed in this war. Some 3,000 plus American soldiers were killed, plus numerous other casualties. One of the issues we have to consider is what are the, was that sacrifice worth it? What are all those lives worth it? And we already say, based on the promotion of these principles that are incredibly dangerous and lead to more violence around the world, more death and destruction, because of these weakening of the U.S. in this region and the strengthening of Iran, and because of what it's doing to our international institutions that are inherently there to help prevent this type of conflict, that these on balance, these sacrifices, these damages were not sufficient. When we look, let me just say briefly about some of these damages, some of these harms. What we have is, thankfully, because of medical advances in science, we have more and more people returning, and American soldiers returning alive into the community. But what we also have is that they're returning maimed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And what this is doing is it's setting them up for a very difficult life. It's taking a whole a generation of military people and putting them into the worst conditions imaginable, where they have incredible flashbacks, cannot drive down the street and live a normal life without fearing roadside bombs. So for all these reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
I thank the Leader of Opposition, and I'm happy to call upon Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you for the floor, Madam Speaker, dear members of the opposition and the government. We heard previously from the leader of the government that this is the risk that we decided to take, that there is a justified risk. Why was it justified? Because the potential danger of actually using those weapons was greater than the damages that we actually incurred as a result of the war. And this is what we're here to talk about. So before I move to our third argument, to elaborate on our third argument, which is why power equals responsibility, I would like to do a couple of points of rebuttal on AJ's speech. So first of all, he said that we haven't found them, so why did we go on the war? The fact that we didn't find them doesn't mean that they don't exist. And the fact that they don't... Yes, thank you. And this is a very important thing, because we cannot assume that just because by now we haven't found them, they don't exist. Second thing is that dictatorship alone is not a justification to go on war, and we agree on that, you know, and this is why we think that we shouldn't go to Venezuela, we shouldn't go to Cuba. But we think that the combination of a dictatorship with nuclear power, weapons that can cause mass destruction, is a reason enough to actually go on war. I'll take it now.
Now we know that those evidences that George was presented were back in the days already very, very weak.
Well, being weak is, there is room for interpretation there. We didn't think that they're weak. We don't think that any evidence for weapons of mass destruction can be weak. We think that any evidence is sufficient enough, and this is why we think that even now, from hindsight, we'd still go to this war. Now, let me move on. Iraq hasn't used these weapons of mass destruction against us, and this is why we're not justified to go on war. Well, again, we disagree. We don't think that we should wait for Iraq to use those weapons of mass destruction on us or on anybody else before we actually react to that. So this is what the Prime Minister was talking about, that we have to be proactive and not reactive, just to react to any attacks, but we have to be proactive. Yes, I'll take now.
If you were to arrest a person based on some idea, but found no evidence for him, would you keep him in jail?
Actually, this is what happens when we have suspicion for war against the country, for terrorism assistance. That's what we do, even if the evidence is not sufficient, to actually arrest the people who actually violate their human rights, because the danger is greater than the right of this particular individual. And thank you for this question. Now, I will move on. Why not Korea? Again, we never said that we're not going to invade North Korea. We decided that in this point of time, this was the evidence that we had, and this is the decision that we made. Obviously, we're not going to fight 5 wars at the same time. So, anyway, this is something for the future, it's not something to discuss in the past. And then we heard that the legitimacy of the United Nations had been decreased as a result of the US dominating over the decision-making process there. Again, we disagree for 2 reasons. First of all, many international institutions are in fact dominated by the United States or other powers. Take the World Bank, take the IMF. So it's not like this is the unique example which is going to destroy the balance of power in our world. No, thank you. And second of all, again, we think that if this balance of power in the United Nations is distorted for the right reason, we are still justified to go on war. And when we think that this reason is to actually convince other nations to support us in our fight against nuclear weapons and potential danger, we think that it is justified. Now, after my rebuttal, I would move on to our third point. So the third point is why power equals responsibility. No, thank you. So, as we heard from the Prime Minister, nuclear weapons of mass destruction can cause great harm. They can cause great harm not only to the American people, but can cause great harm to many other nations as well. Now, the situation, whether we like it or not, in the international sphere is such that we are the major, no thank you, that we are the major power we are the major player, we are the strongest economic and military power. Maybe in the near future somebody else will replace us, but the status quo as of 2003 was this. And we think that because of this great responsibility, we are the ones who need to run this risk. We are the ones who need to make the sacrifices needed to avoid any potential danger that can be incurred from the usage of nuclear weapons of mass destruction. I'll take you now.
Don't you agree that an international institution like the UN could be a better world police than a USA?
Well, we think that the fact that if the United Nations is not taking their responsibility doesn't mean that we shouldn't take our responsibility. So obviously the decision-making process in the United Nations may have a lot of different interests there that may not lead to the best decision. There might be a lot of political interest that can influence the decision. Whereas we think that we have responsibility for our own actions, and we think that taking the responsibility as the strongest military and economic nation in the world, we have to act. Now, if we don't act, and the situation is as follows. If we don't act and the other nations don't feel protected, that alone may cause panic in the international sphere, in the region. That alone may lead to further instability than actually intervening. And we need to be there to show that there are checks and balances on the Iraqi government, that if the Iraqi government in itself is not imposing those checks and balances that my colleague talked about, we should be the ones that impose them. So we think that as the nation that is the only nation that is capable of doing that, we must do it. We don't really have a choice. As of 2003, we must have done it, and we did it, and we're proud for it. So basically, let me try to refresh everything and what has happened so far. We think that in hindsight, we would have still fought the 2003 war in Iraq because there was evidence for weapons of mass destruction. And despite the credibility of this evidence, we think that they were sufficient for us to go on war. They were sufficient for us to make the cost-benefit analysis that actually the cost incurred from a potential war that is preventing the Iraqi government from using those weapons is smaller than the cost can be incurred by the Iraqi government using those weapons. We think that the Iraqi government didn't have the sovereignty, didn't have legitimate authority, and this is why it couldn't have been trusted with those weapons, and this is why we think that we had reasons to invade, to attack Iraq. Why we must have intervened and fought the war was because we have the responsibility of the strongest player in the international sphere. And let's just consider the situation that America hadn't gone to war, and then the nuclear weapons were found and were used, and then who was to blame then? We think that we were to blame, and we think that in this hypothetical situation, we could not have afforded this risk. So for all these reasons, I beg you to propose.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, and I'm happy to call Georgiana.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. What I'm going to do today is basically portray a reality in which the US actually wouldn't have interfered in Iraq and things would have been different. And I can make this point by rebuttaling the power relation point that was brought to us by the government. What I'll do later on is talk about how this has harmed credibility within the US context and within that was very particularly harmful for the US. And I'm also going to talk about the nature of mass destruction weapons and why this is not a good criteria to set a war to begin with. So let's imagine the world as it is, and let's imagine the world as it could have been. It's very important to understand here that we still believe that the US is an important player in today's international relations, and we act upon this upon this knowledge. But what we have to understand that what derives from the source of being the main power actor in a world is that you have to be cautious with the decisions you make, because the decisions you make have incredible impacts in the world around you, right? So when you make a decision of this extent to go and interfere and have a war in a certain situation, you have to understand that the only way you can carry out with the responsibility of being the main power in a certain context is if you make the right decision and make it based on the right evidence. Now, from this perspective, we understand that while there was suspicion of certain evidence being presented while making decision to go at war or not, we believe that that particular evidence was intrinsically flawed. We believe that it was intrinsically flawed because the way the intelligence services work nowadays have it wrong. It's basically on the assumption that things are a puzzle. If we get more information out there, we'll manage to put it somehow together and form a coherent story with that. We don't believe this is the way we should operate and make decisions to begin with, as the US or any other major player, because what you can do, given this flawed system of decision-making and gathering of information, is that you can create stories, create evidence, put things together in such a way that they're flawed to begin with. Because the USA had the wrong mechanism to collect information and put it together, we believe that the evidence presented for this particular case was flawed by default. We believe that the intelligence system collecting information necessary should have been better, and we might consider our work given that particular situation. But we also believe that the derivation of responsibility for a power comes from the ability of making things better and not making things worse. What happened with the Iraq War was that things became worse. They became worse for the country itself, they became worse for the US, and they became worse for the international community. Because what happens if you make a bad decision as a world player is that people will stop trusting you. So if you make systematic bad decisions, what will happen with the international community is that next time you go to the UN and say, we have a good case to make something happen or not happen, people won't take you for granted. So from this perspective, because we have the president and we know that a certain decision was wrong, next time the US goes to the Security Council, they won't get they were true. So that means that in the international context, the US will have less influence. That's why we think that making bad decisions, knowing by default that you have the bad way of making that decision, is worse for the US and itself. I'll take you now.
Yes. Does the UN Security Council doesn't act in Syria because they don't believe the US anymore, or because Russia has very much strategic interest of the UN not intervening in Syria?
Well, we believe we're arguing this particular debate from the perspective of the US. And we do consider that there are many other factors that influence the Security Council decision. But we know that influence and knowing that you made the right decision in the past is one of them. When you lose credibility because you made the wrong decisions, you won't make your way through in the future. And we believe that is particularly wrong from the US in the international perspective context. But we also believe on the opposition side that this was incredibly harmful for the US within the US context. Why is that the case? Because the same principle that we apply in terms of losing credibility as an international player, when you have the responsibility to act upon, you have the same responsibility for acting as a good voice within your own country. And we believe that when your leader in the country makes the wrong decision, when your leader tells you that we have sufficient evidence to go at war and risk our own troops, risk our own soldiers, men and women that go and fight on that territory in very harmful condition, then you will lose the credibility as a leader within the US context. That's what Bush did, that was lost the election with the Republican Party, that's why Obama came to power. And we believe that this is particularly harmful because the main structure of sovereignty within a country, a thing that the government wants to consign on their side, is the capacity of the leader to present arguments and hold themselves accountable to the people themselves. When your own people loses the ability to trust in you, you become less sovereign as a country. You as the US suffers from a democratic perspective, and it's very difficult to play up the role that yes, we have to act within another sovereign entity because we have certain rights if you are losing sovereignty within your own country. We believe that that's a question of hypocrisy, and we believe that the only way that the US can preserve a sovereign democratic status is by making sure that it is accountable and credible to its own country. Making flawed decisions will not do that. Making flawed decisions will do the opposite of that and will lose credibility within your own country. I'm also going to talk a bit about the nature of mass destruction weapons, because I think that what we have heard on the government side is that having a suspicion for mass destruction weapons is good enough reason to actually go in another country and invade it. We believe that on one hand, as AJ has pointed out to you, a lot of countries in the world will have been invaded if that is the case, because a lot of them have the suspicion of having this. But we also believe that when it comes to having weapons of mass destruction, the philosophy of intervention should be different. Why? Because of the very nature of the mass destruction weapons. We have protective weapons and we have destructive weapons. If we distinguish between these two categories, mass destruction weapons, the type of weapons that assure mutual self-destruction among countries are the ones that will be less likely to be used, less likely to be harmful. Those are the particular kind of weapons that people just brag about and never use. Since the Second World War, no one ever used a nuclear bomb, and that's why we shouldn't really think that they will be used in the future. Because as a state, being Iraq at the moment, if you use that, you know that in immediate second after you have used that, a lot of countries in the region opposition, including the US, with having more reasonable doubt of actually going for an intervention, would go against you and would go against you big. Because then that's when the kind of weapons that are destructive, that have all the harms that the government has presented will be used against you as a state. You know that the moment you push that button, your state is destroyed because another country will push that button. No one will ever use in today's society the kind of weapons that were used as a pretext to actually have intervention. Because it harms the general position of the US within the international system, because it harms credibility within its own country, and because those are the kind of weapons that are never actually used, never a good enough reason to interfere, we believe that the opposition has proven its point today, and we beg you to oppose.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We stand firmly with opening proposition today in that we believe that weapons of mass destruction are a clear and good casus belli to go to Iraq, and that we achieved something there to prevent this. However, what we are going to argue today is that even if there were no mass destruction in Iraq, we would still do it, and we would still do the same thing. We believe that is a good thing. How am I going to do that? First, I'm going to bring a point of rebuttal about mutual assured destruction. Then I'm going to bring, I guess, 4 points. 4 points, right? I'm first going to explain why we need public support and why we, let's say, wage the war that we did. Second of all, I'm going to explain why, as the United States, we have the justification to act into the strategic aims of democracy in order to spread democracy around the world. I'm also going to explain how this doesn't jeopardize the US in the United Nations context. Third of all, I'm going to explain what the strategic goals that we achieved in Iraq at this moment actually are. And finally, I'm going to explain that the war in Iraq was not as bad as the opposition wants us to believe at this moment, right? So first of all, about mutual assured destruction, right? They say you wouldn't want to invade North Korea. In fact, we really want to invade North Korea, except China doesn't want to. That's going to be really nasty. That's why we don't do it. Believe mutual assured destruction doesn't work. Second of all, we don't take into account that some people are kind of crazy. We believe that Kim Jong-un is much more likely to push the red button than democracies are. And second of all, with mutual assured destruction, you have a clear incentive to strike first, right? Because if you don't strike first, it's going to hurt harder back to you, right? So we believe that's been refuted. So one thing that we have to explain about warfare the moment that we want to achieve strategic goals. The problem is that we might not always tell the exact truth about what our goals are when we are going to make certain strategic aims. For example, if we want to curb the position of Iraq and Iran together in the Middle East, we're not going to tell them that's what we're going to do, and we're going to place bases there and there in order to get our strategic goals done. For the very simple fact that we don't want Iran and Iraq to know that we're going to do that. So in that case, we say that in order to get public support, we need a clear casus belli, right? And we believe the weapons of mass destruction point was a clear casus belli that also allowed our people of the United States to rally behind us and support the war in Iraq. The moment we say that we wage this war for very clear strategic purposes, we don't think people would get behind it around us. And they say that it jeopardizes the military system of the United States as a whole. We simply don't see that. We believe that we in the United States have massive support on the Republican side still in order to wage international wars if we have a just cause to do that, or clear strategic aims. We don't see that problem really. So, second of all, why are we justified to achieve certain goals in the name of democracy? We say simply democracy is a much better system than dictatorship is. We believe in a democracy people have freedom of speech, they have freedom of choice, they can do all sorts of nice things. We believe that if democracy is under threat, and it clearly was under the influence of Al-Qaeda and Iran, we believe that we have a justification to act in its purpose, right? We not only wage this war to bring democracy to the people of Iraq, we also wage it in order to protect our people and preserve democracy for our people and preserve democracy in the Middle East. So we believe that as a liberal democracy, we have the right to achieve certain strategic goals in the name of democracy. I'll take you in a second. And this also relates to the UN kind of part, right? They assume that the United States, that the Security Council is some kind of a good actor in order to decide where to go to war or not. We simply believe that Putin and China don't have the legitimacy in order to decide such a thing. So I believe that in order that we do this in name of the United States because we have superior moral values and believe we want to spread this around the world and we have the ability to do this, it gives us that responsibility is much better than the Security Council, which is composed of states that are very much dictatorial. We believe they don't have that legitimacy. Yes?
So there are many types of democracies, and if only the ones you were promoting were the ideal ones, just like there can be an ideal monarchy where everyone is treated well and benefits.
Well,
so why is the democracy you're going to create, why would it be a good one?
No. You assume that our prime goals in Iraq are to bring democracy in Iraq. We believe that is a secondary thing, but we believe that when we look at democracies versus dictatorships, democracy have a clear, better mandate in order to place international inventions than dictatorships have, right? And the fact that democracy has been brought to Iraq, we'll bring that in my 4th point, is quite a good thing, that it isn't immediately a paradise, right? Too bad. Right, so, no, thank you. So third of all, the strategic goals that we assumed here, right? Because they said, yeah, Iraq and Iran were a very kind of counterbalance. And this is the interesting thing. That is the exact thing that was about to shift during the period in 2003. We see that Saddam Hussein was the traditional ally of the United States in the period before that as a counterweight to Iran. We saw that the United States, over oil conflicts and whatnot, relations with Iraq became much worse, and we believe in that case there were certain things that could go wrong. First of all, as a Sunni ruler and the strikes of Al-Qaeda saw that these people could reach far beyond their own borders, right? We believe that Saddam Hussein, as a Sunni ruler, actually could harbor Al-Qaeda in that position, and at the same time, Iran could go much stronger because if you don't support with the United States, you might as well go to Iran and form a united bloc, right? So we believe that is something that we prevented from this. And they are probably going to say, yeah, Al-Qaeda, who cares about Al-Qaeda anymore? They aren't powerful enough. And that is the exact reason that we have to go there again if we had to do this. Because we're actually successful in curbing the might of Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda in that region. And that's why I believe we achieved very good strategic goals in that region. So first of all, I need to explain, was it so bad, right? We might want to concede that considering our moral way we convinced our population to go in Iraq doesn't really feel in touch with the situation in Iraq right now. However, if we compare the situation in Iraq with how it was under Saddam Hussein, it's not that worse, right? It's not a very good democracy, but Saddam Hussein was a very authoritarian dictatorship who tortured people, who brought people to camps, who gassed his own population in Kurdistan and whatsoever. We believe that although we might not necessarily make the situation much better, we at least made it a little bit better. And combined with our strategic goals in the region, that's also good. And another thing, that if Iraq and Iran wouldn't go towards each other, the Shiite minority in Iraq might actually revolt, there might be a war. We believe that the situation in the region is much stabler. We protected our own population. We have a bigger mandate to do this. There are no reasons to not to do it again, and that's why we stand in favor. Thank you.
Okay, I thank the previous speaker and happy to call on Felix.
Only for clarification, the situation in Iraq is really, really bad. We have instability, we have a civil war, we have terrorism the whole time. Nobody can go outside in Baghdad because it's so unsecurity. There's such a unsecurity. So we see there was no improvement of the situation for the people. Okay, they were under pressure under Saddam Hussein, but now they are unsecure and lots of people died. So there was no really improvement for the people. I want to the question we are now asking is, what are good reasons for a war, and what are the reasons these sides are offering us. And there were 3 reasons they are offering, and I want to rebuttal those reasons. The first reason is weapons of mass destructions are bad. They are bad. But that's not true, because weapons of mass destructive weapons can also create stability. We saw this in the Cold War, because if somebody has weapons of mass destructive weapons, nobody wants to attack him because he is afraid of these weapons. And if 2 countries have weapons of mass destruction, they are afraid of the counterstrike. So we see there is a possibility of stability which can create those weapons. So these weapons are not a good reason and a good reason to go in. That's why we don't go into India or to Pakistan or to North Korea as well. We don't attack them, and so this reason is a bad reason for a war. The second one is we want to bring in our values, but that didn't work. We want to bring in democracy. There is no democracy. We want to bring in stability. There is no stability now. And the reason for this is because there is a clash of civilization. There are different countries. They have different thoughts about their values, and they are Muslim and we are Christian. So there are different values, and also our media. They are producing They are producing pictures of dictators who aren't that bad, like in Cuba or Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. There are different sides, and we as the Western world have our own side, so we can't judge about their culture and about their system. We have to try to give it in a peaceful way and not by war, because war is causing lots of deaths and it don't improve the understanding of our culture. And that's the big problem I want to talk about. But the next one is, you say you want to protect the people in the Iraq, but how did you protect the people? There were thousands of deaths. So all your reasons to start these wars are not as the best thing. The only the thing which happened is or just now yeah.
Do you seriously believe that a dictator that puts hot screws in the backs of his political opponents is not objectively worse than a modern democracy?
Yeah, of course it's worse than a modern democracy, but we have to. But there is no modern democracy now in Iraq, so that's not the point. So what is a good war? We say a good war is what the United Nations permit. They permit that you can avoid a genocide, and a good war was this in Libya, and they were successful, or in the World War II, to avoid a direct attack of another country, and that's why we have the NATO. And now Germany had some forces in Turkey because they were attacked from Syria. And the third one is if a country calls for help, like in Mali now. And we see all these examples show that was a successful and a humanitarian invasion, because then we don't have a harm for the people if they call us for help, and we don't have these human rights abuses because we have the permission of the United Nations. So the problem of Iraq is that the reasons they gave us, because of these mass destructive weapons, they are simply not true. Now we know they are true. They are not valid. And now we are asking, what are the real reasons? Why did we go to Iraq? Is it because of the oil? Is it for Bush to win the election, to get support from the people because we have an enemy outside? What are the real reasons? And those reasons are not really that harms the credibility in the world, because the United Nations lost lots of their image, and they get a big image problem, and also in the people. Also the people, they are now afraid. We don't want to go to any war. We say they are saying people. We don't want to fight. We don't want to be involved in any international conflict, and that's the problem we see now, because the people are afraid to involve in any conflict. And now we see it in the Obama administration. They are really afraid in standing out of conflicts. But then we lose the United States as a world police, because they are the only one who have the power and the military budget and the ships and the tanks to fight, and they have lots of money to fight, and we don't have other countries who have these big resources. And now, because the United States are now afraid to step in any humanitarian and any good war, to avoid a genocide, or to avoid, like in Syria, they are now really cautious about step into a real problem, into a real conflict. And that's why it's really bad, because this huge image damage is a big harm for the whole world, because we lose the United States as the world policy. So we are talking about, I want to summarize what I just said. I talked about what are good reasons for war, and the reasons the oppositions told us are not good. I showed you that they for nuclear weapons and for to bring in our values, they are bad, and that the image problem, the loss of the credibility of the United States leads to a damaged world police of the United States, and that's bad for our peace and for the world. Thank you.
Okay, I thank the previous speaker, and I'm happy to call on the government.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker.
To clarify, today in this debate, we evaluate whether or not the policy we chose to do to invade Iraq is something that has given us positive or negative effects. We as a proposition bench believe that the invasion indeed has reached some of the goals that we intended to do, even though that may not have been the first reason that we told the public. We think important strategic goals are reached, and therefore it has been a good decision. Okay, what do we do today? We will compare the situation that is today in Iraq with a most likely situation that would have been if we wouldn't have invaded. I will talk about three things. I will talk about the reasons that we think are most important next to the atomic weapon thing, and these are the stability in the region and the threats that are to the citizens in the region there, but also to citizens outside of the region, so in the US and other nations. And I will talk about the legitimacy of our invasion and why we think it's actually not such a bad thing to lie, and we will compare exactly what is Iraq now to what it probably would have been if we didn't invade. But first, yes.
So, post-invasion Iraq was chaos, and US officials have said there was no reconstruction plan and a surge was required. So if the goal was to bring democracy, why was there no plan?
We say the democracy in Iraq itself was not the only reason. We think the reason that we invaded is that Saddam Hussein was not controllable anymore, that the region was too much of a threat, but I'll get back to that in my own constructive material. So first of all, let's have a little bit of rebuttal of what they said, because the second opposition said, yeah, we shouldn't invade there because there was a clash of cultures, and as a U.S. nations we cannot bring this. And we think no, there are some very legitimate reasons like human rights and like some kind of freedom, and we don't think we have given all the people in Iraq the best freedom there is now. But we think that we have the legitimacy to at least try to make the region more controllable and to make it's better for or more likely that we are not engaged by terrorists and stuff like that. And I think we actually made a good decision in that. And that brings us to the real reasons, and that are these goals actually reached? Because if we accept that the reasons that we gave there are better stability, and we should evaluate the policy on these reasons. And we think actually, yes, we have some strategic position there now. We think that if we had let Saddam Hussein stand there as his
as a dictator, he was turning away more and more from united control, from talking, and we think he had actually toxic gases, and he had all kind of stuff to control all the opposition. And we do not think, even though it's not a paradise now, and of course we have killed, there are been people killed, we do not believe that it's possible to imagine that a world where Saddam Hussein would still be a dictator today would be better than what there is now. So we think that this is not such a big problem. And now, given that we looked at the citizens in Iraq, which are not, at least not worse off, we think, than under Saddam Hussein, let's then look at what happened to the other countries in this region. And we think, yes, we think now there is more of a stability between the powers that are in the region. We think actually because Iraq is somehow controlled by America, it's actually easier to retain the peace in this environment. And we see, of course, there is still war now, but we as the United States had actually our legitimacy because we don't think that if you are a true believer of freedom that you can actually turn away from this responsibility. And this is actually what first proposition. Yeah, you want this.
You're implying that it is legitimate for the US as a democracy to lie to the world and its own people where it derives its legitimacy for in order to do something that failed on your goal.
No, because we reached the goal. Because it's we assume that it's really a lot more stable now than if we didn't reach there. Because Al Qaeda is not a real big threat at the moment. Iraq is not at the moment. We don't think that they will control all of the region, or they will control all of us. And we think one of the reasons that they will not do this is actually because we invaded, and you never explained why this invasion was not necessary to make some control about that. And that brings us to the last point. That's actually an answer to your POI as well. Is then looking back, why did we lie? And Josse really explained this quite well, I think, because we needed the public support to make this fast action, and we think it's very difficult to explain to citizens at the moment. We need strategic positions in a region that they do not know, and we don't think you can actually gain the support of a lot of people, while actually in the long run this is something that's not only good for the region but also good for the chance of freedom and also the security of people in America and in other Western societies. And we think because you actually lie and tell them something that is more practical to them, they can imagine more like, oh, there are these massive weapons and this is something we should interact now. You can actually gain this support for a common goal that's actually on the long run better for everyone. And we think we actually sometimes you are legitimate, and it is reasonable to make some other reason, which is not maybe your first reason, apply more so that you can actually win these people and in the end have some policy that make sure that this terrorism and these dictators don't get out of hand. So what have we talked about? We have evaluated whether or not some goals have been reached. And we said, yes, we think most important goals, like some stability, some protection against terrorism, some in the region are actually reached. And of course, there are some negative values. Of course, we have lost some image and some money, but we think in the long run, what the image of America is way better as protecting of their own principles, protecting of the citizens not only here, but also the freedoms of the president there. And we think the image of the United States would not have been better if we would have been in a world where the flaming dictatorships and terrorism was here. For all these reasons, I'm very proud to propose. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, during this debate, we saw a very interesting development on this side of the bench. While the first proposition came up and sent here and said, well, weapons of mass destruction, we had to fight for the people, secure our world. Second proposition is saying, oh, you know what, lying is okay to start a war. And we say, first of all, it's not possible to fight for our liberal democratic values if other countries recognize that we start wars by lies, right? When we're saying, oh, we're so good, we're supporting, we want democracy, but on the other hand, we're lying to start a war, they won't trust us, and that is very bad for the whole global community. Then second of all, Roel said, well, there's stability in Iraq, and I'm questioning, where is stability in Iraq? I mean, even in Baghdad, there's only certain streets that are secure, right? So there is no security at all. And we say sometimes it's better to have a strong dictator until a middle class develops that starts a democratic revolution than to just kill the dictator and wait for, well, nothing to happen and make it even more unstable. And we saw that in the Arab Spring, that really happens. And there's a good example for it, that countries can the people can step up and try to fight for the democratic values by themselves. And the third thing is the question, why do we want to control Iraq anyways? Is it just for egoistic reasons that does not really help the world community? And we say there are two negative outcomes. First of all, also for the USA, that the credibility of politicians in general declines. And second of all, because there won't be soldiers to fight anymore, because people know that the government lies, and that is very bad. But coming to my own point. No, thank you. I'm going to talk about three things. First of all, were there evidences, and if yes, how strong were they? Second of all, when is it allowed to start a war? And third of all, what are the consequences of these decisions we have made? First of all, evidences. First prop says evidences were clear, but we're saying the UN had good reasons not to intervene in Iraq because they didn't trust the evidences, because of course they were made up by George Bush and his crazy other politicians. And we say the Security Council, in some ways you're right, that only Russia doesn't invade Syria because of their own reasons. That's true, but in that example, the Security Council had good reasons not to go to Iraq because the evidences were just not true. And we say, why did USA choose Iraq? Why not North Korea or other countries? Then Jan Felix stand up and said, well, was it maybe because of oil reasons? Maybe because of George Senior Bush had another, had to fix things with Saddam Hussein again? Or was it maybe because of internal affairs that Bush had to push himself in the Republican Party? And then they say, well, evidences, if we have evidences of weapons of mass destruction, we have to start a war. But Jan Felix said, no, we should not start a war then, because weapons of mass destruction are, to a certain degree, good to create stability. Why that? Because some countries like Iran just feel underrepresented in the global society, because they say, no one likes us, they want to fight against us. But those countries will never drop the bomb because they only need the bomb for rhetorical reasons to strengthen themselves internal and external. They would never drop the bomb because they know that USA will kill the whole country, right? And that is also a reason why we should, to a certain degree, allow those weapons. The second question in this debate was about when war is allowed. And they say, proposition, starting preemptive war is okay. So we have the right to intervene in the country even if we have no clear evidence. But we on opposition say this will definitely lead to more war in the whole global society. Why that? Because you can just make up reasons to start a war. No, thank you, that's great. I mean, I can just say USA has weapons of mass destruction and then just start a war just for lying. And we then said with Jan Felix, war should first only be under the UN and as democratic as possible. And then Jan Felix, you have a deep analysis of when wars are justified. And we say in genocide, when there's a direct attack, or if countries ask us to help, if they have civil wars, then war is justified. But in other reasons, we are not allowed to intervene if we have no clear evidence. Yes, your question, please.
Well, if the population is repressed and they don't have a voice to ask for help, how are we going to do it?
Yes, that's, I mean, most of the countries in this world have this situation. I'm saying this is a very sad thing, but they have to fight for their democratic values for themselves, because in other situations that won't help. I mean, we saw that in Afghanistan, that it didn't help at all to come from outside and try to push democratic values on them. It just doesn't work. So we say, as sad as it is, we have to wait and to accept this situation. No, thank you. And then the third question of this debate is, what are the consequences of these decisions? And then we say, first option, Iran is strengthened, UN institutions are weakened, but Jan Felix pointed out that Iraq and USA suffered very badly. Iraq because of insecurity and all the deaths. I've explained that in my rebuttal already, so there's no improvement. Things are getting worse. But also on the side of the USA, it's very bad because soldiers, if there are real reasons for wars, let's take the example of Libya and Syria, where the troops of Assad are killing their own people, killing families, killing children. Then, at these situations, countries like USA are just tired. They are tired of fighting these wars, and this is a very bad consequence that we're living now up from. And in this situation, USA can't fulfill the role of a world police if soldiers and if the whole country is just tied into going to war. And then we say at the end of this debate, we have to weigh up the chances of maybe, because it's preemptive, that there might be an attack. I've explained that they won't attack because they won't take the risk of getting killed by themselves. And on the other side, all these very bad and negative consequences. Because of that reasons, I beg you to oppose.